I mean, he cut into your time, man.
Well, listen, I like Andy, but it's great to have other guys out there that can suck up the joy of the moment and be more long-winded than me. Okay, so I'll gladly come on after someone just went 5 minutes into my time. I'm happy to be back with you guys. And look, those guys are, they're all over it. As I said, I mentioned I like Andy a lot, and there's so many good ones out there that are nonstop talking with all of the people that I know, and they get the information as best they can. But I think, as you guys know, I talk to the guys that they talk to, but privately. I form the difference in being a reporter versus a commentator is I think, on full display when you talk to me, because I'm not a reporter, but I base my opinions on those that I speak to in a covert manner. And I've been saying for how long that we were getting to this point. None of this is a shock to me. Many others are shocked, and the timing was, I'm not going to lie about that. The timing here was pretty incredible, because it appeared that the announcement of the new Big Ten contract was only weeks, maybe even days away. And obviously that's changed because the makeup of the Big Ten has changed and is continuing to change. It's a fluid situation. So it may be a while until all that's finalized. All we really know is that Fox has the largest of the contracts and is consulting on what's remaining with the contract. So that hell, we might be past Labor Day before we actually know, what the new deal is going to look like, because we don't know what these conferences are going to look like.
Tim, what do you think the end game is for all this?
Well, the end game is to get everything in place so that by the time the new deals are going to be enacted, we can get some form of universal leadership for college football, because they're out of the NCAA. Okay, NCAA is going to be a complete non-factor for college football, period. It should have been a long time ago, as you guys know. I've said that really every time I think I've been on your show. And we're finally going to rid ourselves of the NCAA even dabbling in such matters as infractions and enforcement and the other gobbledygook that they have, rules, the making of rules by virtue of the NCAA when you have soccer coaches on a rules committee. Really? We've been putting up with that throughout the history of college football. And we're going to get rid of that. Thank God. And the NCAA will be basically in play only because they have a contract that's huge for NCAA men's basketball, which funnels 80% of its revenue, or more than 80%, into the non-revenue producing sports championships. So there is certainly a place for the NCAA to govern all those Olympic sports. The men's basketball tournament is making so much money that it can take care of the women's tournament, as well as so many of those other sports, and NCAA Division II and III football and FCS football. So it's not that the NCAA doesn't provide a worthwhile service for the member institutions, but it just has no business being in Division I college football. It's been outgrown, and the Supreme Court basically told them that in July of last year when they voted 9-0 when the NCAA tried to pull a rabbit out of a hat. So that the end game is getting universal leadership for Division I college football, so that football people from schools that are in a position to and want to perform at the highest level are governing themselves. That's the end game. And how those conferences go about doing it, and the makeup of those conferences, and the men that make up the leadership for the conferences, and perhaps, and it's my hope anyway, something close to a rotating czar or czar for Division I college football can be put into play. That's what this sport sorely needs. And we're going to find all of this out in the next 2 calendar years. I think by 24 we'll know. Obviously, the contract for the Big Ten starts a year before the others, the Big 12 and the Pac-12 in 25, and of course the new college football playoff contract will be done in 25 and implemented in 2026. And I think that all of this news is just moving us more towards all of the things that I've been espousing and hoping for over 5 decades. And, there are a lot of fans out there. You've probably seen it on my Twitter line. I've decided today to go ahead and put out another video to react to some of the negativity. People, they see and hear about money, and they think all of a sudden if their team is not in this made up media line called the Big Two, it's being called the Big Two because of revenue, not because anybody outside of the Big Two is not invited. That's garbage, and that's the interpretation. That the world of images and impressions, as my friend Spencer Tillman always says, is all people care about. And they hear that and they get annoyed and pissed off, and they think that that we are looking down our noses at anybody not Big Ten and SEC, and that's not the truth. Okay, it's not. So stop listening to the same talking heads who say the same things, who aren't necessarily looking out for the good of all of Division I college football. We just have a lot of confusion out there. Okay, and I'm still having to remind people that the NCAA hasn't had a thing to do. I mean, a thing to do with the monetary aspects of college football since the Supreme Court ruling of the Universities of Georgia and Oklahoma Supreme Court case of 1984. We wouldn't be here without that. And yet there are people, even in media, that don't know what the hell I'm talking about when I say it.
Tim, just on the surface from a football and I guess just overall standpoint, what are your thoughts on those 2 LA schools now being Big Ten members?
Well, I think it's a seismic shift, yes. An incredibly sound business decision on their part, no doubt about it. And by the way, I'd say this if I didn't work at Fox, okay? Let me clear that up. No one at any network or any company that I've ever worked for told me what I needed to say. If I wouldn't have lasted 5 years if that were the case. Okay. I think it's great for those schools. I think USC probably figured, you know what, we've been holding the water for this conference for how long, and what are we getting? And now we've got an opportunity to get over $100 million annually versus what? Look, that's a sound business decision. And UCLA going with them, from a football standpoint, people might say, and I've even heard this, well, gee, they're just tagging along. What does UCLA bring? What does UCLA bring? Have you buried your head in the sand for how many years? Do you know anything about college basketball? Yeah, I think they bring a lot to the Big Ten. Okay, no doubt about it. And it started the ball rolling. Yes, no question. And I don't think that the ball's going to stop rolling, as I said, until possibly the end of the summer, going into the Labor Day weekend. We'll maybe figure all this out. But I think it's a tremendous move for those 2 schools. I think it clearly sends the message that it's football here that's driving the bus. I think we all knew that. If you didn't know it before, you certainly know it now. I've seen all the reporting about, well, what about the Olympic sports? Well, you find a way to take care of the Olympic sports. Okay, we'll get to that matter in just a moment. Right now, the priority is getting the revenue from Division I college football, because never before have these schools needed the revenue to the extent that they need it now. They understand, those being the leaders of the institutions and the conferences, they now know that stabilizing the long-term financial futures of their schools is forever hitched to the wagon of college football. and you've got to do whatever you can to make sure that the viability of your school financially is in a great place. Because with all this money out there, the over $75 million or so reported to be going to SEC schools, and the over $100 million annually reportedly anyway, to the Big Ten schools, you can bet that the players are going to be in a position to get revenue share within the new structuring of the NIL, which I believe will happen hopefully before the end of the year. Hopefully, when we get some stability in our college football Division I leadership, we'll be able to see some help after the November midterms, particularly if one party controls both the House and the Senate, so that these states that have such a competitive advantage over other states, that disparity is shoved aside. We need to do something about that. We can't get the genie back in the bottle, but we can certainly regulate name, image, and likeness far better than we currently are.
Tim, you mentioned the Olympic sports, and what do you do about the Olympic sports? Well, if I'm USC and UCLA and I've been operating with a $37 million budget and I all of a sudden have $100 million to do it, they've been taken care of before. Now you have more money to do that. So
yeah, you do, and perhaps the travel can be handled in a similar way, only a larger version of what they've already been doing in the Pac-12. People forget this, but in the Pac-12, part of the reasons why it's hard to win on the road in that league consistently has been that the road trips are really long road trips, okay? It is far from Tucson, Arizona to Pullman, Washington, and Eugene, Oregon. Those are long trips. So when you go on the road in the Pac-12, whether it's football or basketball, you basically, especially basketball, you go off to the state of Washington and you play in Pullman and you play in Seattle. You go to Arizona and you play Arizona, on a Wednesday, Saturday. You make sure you play teams in that same area. Well, I think on a larger scale, obviously, if you're in the Big Ten, you make sure that and you're out west, you make sure you fly to Chicago, and then you hit every school that's within driving distance in a bus from Chicago to name that school, okay? Indiana, Purdue, Wisconsin, Illinois, you hit them, ba-boom, ba-boom, ba-boom. There are ways to get this done. The people that are bringing this stuff up are the ones that just want to say something bad about intercollegiate athletics and are just lathered up every time that they can poke holes at it. And you know who those people are. They never like anything relative to college athletics. They're pro sports people in pro sports towns that can't wait to use college athletics as its whipping boy on a daily basis.
Tim, when you look at the current state of what else is out there, I think it's pretty much everybody's in agreement that Notre Dame kind of just holds the future sort of in their hands for probably however long they want. Like, they're never going to not be a very wanted commodity. But in terms of, what you see out there with the Pac-12 now needing to respond and talking with the ACC and whatever that could turn out to be. And then there's the Big 12 right there in the middle, and a feeling amongst those, in power that they probably need to be on the aggressive a little bit. Just how do you sort of see that landscape of the non-Big Ten SEC aspects of this, the alliance talk and those sorts of things?
Well, Mr. Yormark certainly hit the ground running, didn't he?
Oh, man.
Yeah. Welcome to collegiate athletics.
Media days next week.
I'm sure Bob Bowlesby said, as he was welcoming him into the office, well,
good luck.
You ready for a field trip? Let's go. But I do think, and I said this earlier, everyone was claiming that was an outside-the-box hire. Well, in my mind, outside the box is exactly what intercollegiate athletics has needed for quite some time. His background in marketing, both from the NBA standpoint with the Nets, as well as with NASCAR, and even from an entertainment point of view with Jay-Z and Rock Nation, this is all going to serve him well. And I think we'll bring a breath of fresh air to have a guy like him in the business. And certainly his resume is a stark contrast to that of his predecessor. But Bob Bowlesby is to be congratulated for doing what he did they're ahead of the game, the Big 12, because of what Bob Bowlesby did, reacting to Oklahoma and Texas exiting a year ago, to be proactive, to get BYU, to get the three top schools out of the American Conference, and have some momentum at a time when their contract negotiations were about to come up. And, as I said before, I think that they're in position already to be ahead of the curve, particularly when compared to the Pac-12. The Pac-12's got problems, and at the very top of the list of problems is the fact that George Kliavkov, along with Jim Phillips, it's not surprising that the two leagues that are most vulnerable are being run by the two commissioners that voted against the 12-team playoff at their meetings that took place around the time of the Final Four. That's a problem. Those presidents can't be particularly happy about the situation that their schools find themselves in those collective leagues. Well, tell me two leagues that needed to have a 12-team playoff any more than the Pac-12 and the ACC. So you reap what you sow, and that's the situation that I think has propelled the Big 12 into a very positive situation when compared to the other two conferences. And a couple of thoughts that I'll pass along. One, I don't think you're going to see a merger of any kind between the Big 12 and the Pac-12, because the Pac-12, just its mission statement is so different from that of the Big 12. Issues, I think, with faith-based universities, certainly that figured into the equation for BYU when Utah went and they didn't. It was not a problem, as you could see, with the Big 12, geographically set in the Bible Belt of the country. So if anything's going to be done between the Pac-12 and anyone, it's more likely to be the ACC than the Big 12. But again, I think the defense mechanism for both makes the Big 12 to be in an advantageous position at this stage. I said this shortly after in fact, it was the day of the USC UCLA announcement. The Big 12 was on the horn right away with Utah, with Colorado, with the two Arizona schools. And I thought it was pretty remarkable yesterday to see, tweets coming out from, the Andy Staples and the Nicole Arbachs of the world saying the Pac-12 has now announced that it is beginning negotiations for its new television contract. At the very same time that was being reported by them, another report was out simultaneously by another reporter. Six of those schools out of the Pac-12 are in serious conversations with the Big 12.
Yeah.
So they're clearly already behind. I mean, it's obvious the Pac-12 is already behind. So I think the Big 12 here, despite what Paul Feinbaum might say, is not dead yet and is going to be in a position of power when compared to what's left of the so-called autonomous five as we knew it in coming days and weeks.
Tim, can you ever see at one point in the Big 12, Texas got more of a piece of a pie than others in the conference when it came to TV revenue? Then there's the Longhorn Network, which was kind of you could have that, but we all want to be equal. The SEC has always been, we're as strong as our weakest link. It's great. That's why no matter if some teams hate each other, they're all in it as one. Can you ever see again down the road with all this expansion and whatever that they go back to where some schools get more than others, or would that create a problem?
I think it would be very wise to follow really the blueprint that Roy Kramer said with the SEC. He gets overlooked a lot, Smokey. He does. He gets overlooked a lot for setting up the SEC for its incredible success, starting with the first ever SEC playoff game. Even though the conference divisions are being wiped away pretty much across the board, it was that pickup of both A&M at the time, South Carolina and Arkansas at the time in 1992 that enabled the SEC championship and a playoff game to determine who would win a conference title. Basically, what it created was another revenue stream, so that at the time, people forget this, but ABC did the first couple of SEC title games, even though CBS had the contract for regular season college football. So they had to absorb that in the next negotiations. It was a moneymaker for them to do what they did. But what Kramer said from the jump and what Slive followed through on as the SEC grew, and particularly with its SEC on CBS moniker, even though the deal was one of the great deals ever for a television entity, and it's still intact for another 2 years, a $55 million TV deal. They got on a Tiffany network. They were on CBS at that wonderful time of 3:30 Eastern and 2:30 Central, and their championship game was so big that other conferences wouldn't schedule a game up against them. They didn't want to lose their audience. So, I think that having the money divided equally is absolutely the way to go if you can do it. Now, there are specific circumstances where maybe you have to alter that theme to some extent. I'll give you an example. Let's say Notre Dame, who can do pretty much whatever they want to do, right, and still be in great shape. If they wanted to save the ACC, they could. They could say, you know what, we decided we'll go ahead and join, but we want a bigger piece of the financial pie, and we want to hold on to our NBC contract for our home games. Now, do you think Jim Phillips would give them that? I do. Whatever you want. Okay, that's what he'd say. I think there are special exceptions that you make in order to consummate a deal that can save your conference. Because, look, if Clemson leaves and Florida State, Miami, North Carolina, if they're gone, you're done. Okay, and the ACC is this is how bad their TV deal is. They barely make annually a little over 12 to 13 million per school in a contract that lasts until 2036. Now, there's a big grant of rights that you have to pay to get out because you have to pay it over that period of time through 2036. But in 1 year of being in the Big Ten, Notre Dame can handle whatever that grant of rights issue is because they're going to make $100 million in a single season if they go to the Big Ten. They don't have to have it. They get greater endowments and make more money than just about anybody in this conversation of college football. But I think that if you're the commissioner of a league, you've got to take a look at that. From a Big 12 standpoint, specifically to your region of the country, I think the first and foremost thing you do without the two big kahunas in there is you make absolutely certain that the money is divided equally. And you should, because, look, the top tier of the new Big 12 is going to include Oklahoma State, Baylor, TCU. Who am I leaving out? I think the addition certainly of BYU puts them in that area. They've got an international following.
Oklahoma State.
Because of Cincinnati and Houston. Houston's a financially solvent location. I mean, you've got a whole new echelon or tiers, if you will, of power within the Big 12, but not so much that you would necessarily change the payout. I think it would be very smart to get rid of that now that Oklahoma and Texas have exited stage right.
Tim, this is more of a kind of the fantasy social media question here. There's obviously been a lot of talk about everything having to do with expansion, but a lot of talk about, who could the Big Ten potentially grab? Who could the SEC grab if the ACC grant of rights were to, just disintegrate or something like that? Mm-hmm. Now, see, a lot of people rumored who do you think would be, if the SEC could have their pick, who would be the best fits, would be the most logical fits, like a Clemson, et cetera, if the ACC were to just fantasy-wise, like I said, fall apart?
Yeah. Well, I think there's still some surprises from the Big Ten. Okay. It all depends on what Notre Dame does and what the next move by the Big Ten might be. Okay. There is absolutely no denying in terms of product on the field and you can make a case that if in college basketball, Villanova created a blue blood, and they did, certainly in college football, there's been a blue blood created at Clemson.
Right.
That we wouldn't be talking about if Dabo Swinney hadn't done in the last half dozen years what he's done. Listen, this talk about having AAU universities within your league, I think that some of that conversation now has been somewhat swept under the rug, and particularly when you've got an institution like Notre Dame and this is all based on Notre Dame going in, okay? My hypothetical is based on Notre Dame saying, you know what, we're coming. Well, I wouldn't rule out Clemson from the Big Ten either. I think the potential is there because you've already crossed the entire country. You know, you got a team in Piscataway, New Jersey, and 2 teams in LA. If you put a team in the Southeast, I mean, now you got a national, truly national conference, a league that is truly national in every sense. I'm not saying it will happen. I'm saying everything's on the table. That's what I'm telling you. Most people would say under no circumstances would Clemson want to be anywhere other than the SEC. Okay, I'm going to pause on that one. I'm going to tell you there may be more to that than you think. Let's not forget about the political issues between South Carolina and Clemson, too, which can sometimes be rough. We've seen that in the past when we were talking about potential expansion. Florida State and Clemson were at the top of the list when they wound up getting Arkansas and South Carolina. Okay, they were at the top of the list, and that was a long time ago. And, I think that, they were talking Nebraska before they wound up with Missouri the last time around. Okay, so anything could possibly happen here. But if Notre Dame is off the table, then the next big get for me is Clemson, solely because of what they've done, how the program has projected itself, and both on the field and off, they've grown their national brand. But North Carolina, right after that, is of greater value than any other school in the ACC. Any other school in the ACC. Carolina's got incredible endowments. It's an outstanding university with an alumni base scattered all through America. When they play basketball, there's no higher rating for any team. They even outrate Kentucky in the NCAA tournament. Carolina drives it. Miami would be the other one because everyone would love to see, a team from South Florida. And then Florida State has lost some of its luster, but if Miami's in, Florida State's got to be considered given their history and tradition. But they're not of the same value that they were, say, when Jimbo took over for Bobby Bowden. Those are the big gets. In the Pac-12, I've been hearing all about the Bay Area because of market size in San Francisco. But if you visit Cal or Stanford, and I love both institutions, I've been to them several times in recent years. College football is just not as big a deal in Berkeley, California, nor is it in Palo Alto. I did a Notre Dame Stanford game there 2 years ago at the close of the season, and there were more Irish fans there than they were Cardinal fans. And as good as they were under David Shaw for such a long period of time, and they carried the banner for the Pac-12 North for, about a decade, but they have struggled of late. Washington and Oregon, well, actually in order, Oregon and Washington are the next two you want to get. Those are the two that bring the biggest ratings that are remaining from the Pac-12 that you could foresee going into the Big Ten. They're the next calls, in my opinion, you make. If you get Notre Dame and you're trying to fill out the next three, if you're going to use two of those three in the Pac-12, first you go to Eugene, then you go to Seattle to get those two programs. And when you're at those two programs, whether it's at Alson or you're at the stadium on the lake, I mean, it is just gorgeous.
Yeah, it looks it
in Seattle at Husky Stadium. If you've ever been to those two stadiums, you know what I'm talking about. They are, without a doubt, in my opinion, perceived as a bigger get than either Stanford or Cal.
Tim, I know you got to go. We always appreciate it. And you jumped on the day when we discussed the next time we could get you. We appreciate your time and your knowledge. Well, thanks for allowing me. I know you don't love to have me back as often, perhaps, as you have recently, but I was looking at my schedule and I said, yeah, how about today? And it worked out. I'm always here for you. You know that. Give my best to all the Bears out there. I'm looking forward to getting in there for some games this season. I hope you are. And when you are, we'll make sure we see you. Thank you so much, Tim Brando, who has almost become, as steady a segment with us as the Phil Bennett times, you know, as far as what he brings to the table. Thanks to Tim Brando for his time, Fox Sports.